This is Hidden Killers Live with Tony Brueski, Stacey Cole, and Todd Michaels.
We're talking with Thien Ho. He's the author of The People versus the Golden State Killer, and also the DA who helped prosecute the Golden State Killer several years back. I want to ask, because I think a lot of people are wondering. I was wondering, because it's been a few years since I've done anything on the case. Obviously, a lot of it has wrapped up, and he's in his cage. But as we were just talking, he looked so frail and so fragile in court. We've now obviously learned that was all an act. A few years later now, he's 79 years old, I believe. What can you reveal about what this guy is like today in prison?
So he received multiple life without the possibility of parole sentences. And so he's not getting out of prison. So he's in prison down in the Central Valley. He's in what we call the Protective Needs Unit. That unit has other child molesters and rapists and snitches. And they're separated together because if you put them in GPOP or general population, they're going to get killed. Dahmer was killed because he was a sexual predator. And those sexual predators are not highly looked upon in prison. Plus, if you can kill somebody like a Golden State Killer or a Jeffrey Dahmer, you're going to gain notoriety. So they put him in this protective needs unit. He works in the mess hall, in the cafeteria. But what I do know, and what I have been told, is that he is constantly looking over his shoulder, worried and terrified that somebody's going to attack him. And that is, frankly, the right thing. I was very thrilled when I heard that, because he made people feel that way in their lives. And so it's about time that he lives and gets to feel his own living hell.
Are there people who have access to him that could harm him, even though he is protected?
And can we fill their canteen as an incentive?
Well, but my question is, he's protected and he's looking over his shoulder. Who is he looking at?
He's looking at everybody. I mean, you don't know where that attack's going to come from. Now, he happens to be in there with other child molesters and other rapists that are looking over their shoulders, but there are also people that are snitches and gang dropout people that probably don't even like him. So, the former gang members, they detest rapists and child molesters, and that's exactly who he is. So, could he be attacked? Absolutely. And that's probably why he's looking over his shoulder, rightfully so.
When the victims were giving their impact statements, and I want to say this about your book, it is very victim focused. It's not so much the life story of the Golden State Killer. We've already heard that a gazillion times. This is really getting into the victims themselves, their lives, how it's affected them, and it's a very, very real and raw look at the damage and that this monster caused. I want to ask, when they were giving their victim impact statements to him in court, and he was sitting there looking like a decrepit zombie, what was that like for you? What was that like for the victims? One on the outside who wouldn't necessarily know how much of a chameleon he was. Us just kind of watching from a distance, I think a lot of us thought, is he even hearing them? Like, is anything even registering? Do you think he heard what they were saying? And if so, how do you think that was bouncing off of his mind? I know he did make a short statement there, but in your opinion, from what you saw and you felt being in there, what was that like?
I can tell you that sitting there 6 feet away from him and listening to victim after victim walk up and talk about the impact that his crimes had on their lives, it was very emotionally draining. At the end of the day, I'd just sit down and just kind of close my eyes and just take in a lot of deep breaths, because it was just so emotional, impactful. It's like every person that came up there, every story, it just tore at the very fabric of your heart. And I will never forget, there were two. The first was the impact statement given by Gay Hardwick. She was home with her husband, and she talked about how she brought up this piece of paper, it was a piece of paper that was all crumpled up. And she says that this piece of paper is me. It's crumpled up. It's no longer, it represented my life and it's been crumpled up and torn apart and stomped upon. And even when you pull it apart, it's still all wrinkled. And then she brought up a clean sheet of paper and said, this is what my life would have been before you. And I know that you witnessed and you saw these horrible things happen to your sister, but you did these things to me, and I didn't turn out to be a monster. And she talked about how she was on her way to being an executive, very successful. And then she locked herself in her house afterwards. And eventually she came out of her house and she picked a career of teaching little kids, toddlers, because she knew that those kids couldn't hurt her. That's how much of
Wow.
an impact it had on her. And then I was watching him, and he was sitting there with his mask on because we're in the middle of COVID, and he's just looking straight ahead with that zombie look. But there was one moment. So Jane Carson, she was one of the early victims. She was a nurse. She was in the military. She left the military eventually as a colonel. She wrote a book, Frozen in Fear. So she's fire and brimstone. And when she gave her impact statement, he says that, I've brought somebody here with me today, somebody that is also a victim. That person is Bonnie. And she brought Bonnie up. Now, for those who are familiar with the case, Joseph DeAngelo was engaged to a woman named Bonnie, and she called off the engagement. And years later, when he was committing one of his rapes in Davis, California, he was sitting there rocking back and forth and crying and saying, I hate you, Bonnie. Now, there have been people, and I think that it's misplaced and it's wrong, that has blamed Bonnie for him committing these crimes. No, that is downright wrong to blame Bonnie.
Yep.
These crimes lay at the feet of Joseph DeAngelo and Joseph DeAngelo only. But from the time that Bonnie basically, ended that relationship, that engagement, DeAngelo had not seen her for 40 something years. And so Jane brought her to the courtroom to stand right there.
The Bonnie, not just
The
a
Bonnie.
random Bonnie, but
No.
the Bonnie.
Just a Bonnie
The
she met
Bonnie.
at Kmart.
Now,
But like it was her. It was genuinely her.
it was Bonnie. It was her. Brought her right there. And Bonnie is standing there 6 feet looking at him. And Jane's just laying into him, calling him the word, addressing him directly and just laying into him. And Bonnie's right there. And so I immediately look over to DeAngelo. And even though he had a mask on and he's sitting there, his breathing literally stopped when Bonnie came up. And then he started to breathe again, but it was really shallow and he had a gulp. And so Jane wanted to get a reaction out of him.
Good.
And Jane got a reaction out of him. It was awesome.
Why do you think that was? That Bonnie is the thing that got a reaction out of him, and what else could get a reaction out of him? In a comparison I'll make is the Kohberger sentencing, which just took place, where just stood there stone faced. But when Olivia Gonzalez got up there and went into him, there was a lot of people who were sitting around going, that seemed to be the time that Kohberger had some sort of a reaction, that he had some sort of fear going on in him. It because she was going after very specific aspects of his personality, his intelligence, the things that he thought he was very good at. And when she was attacking all of those things, that's what seemed to trigger him. Folks like this seem to have some sort of a trigger, something. And just saying you're a horrible person, you're a monster, you're a blah, 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 that usually doesn't affect them very much. They already know that. They've accepted that. They take pride in that in some cases. How did having Bonnie there, and why did having Bonnie there get some sort of reaction out of him? And are there any other areas of life that would trigger this man to feel something, or to trigger that anger, that whatever emotion it would be in a monster like this, that is recognition of something that they don't want to face?
So Kohberger, as you may recall, was a criminal justice major, right?
Yep.
And DeAngelo was a criminal justice major. They were both attracted because they wanted this element of control. They wanted the inside knowledge. And it comes back to control. He did not have control over Bonnie. But he tried to have control, and I cover that relationship in the book. He tried to have control over Bonnie and get her to do certain things, and she wouldn't do it. And that's what ultimately ended that relationship. That she ended up taking away the control from him. Bonnie did. And here was a victim, Jane Carson, who took control back and away from him. And not only did she do that, she brought somebody else who had
Yeah.
done that, who he had not seen for so long. So what he wanted most in life was control. And he gets to sit there and control himself and be in that zombie state. He gets to sit there and like hold himself a certain way, portray himself a certain way. But when somebody else comes in and pierces that control, that's what gets to him.
What a beautiful moment.
Did you get a chance to talk to Bonnie? Did you have any interactions with her to hear what life is like for her? That's got to be a weird juxtaposition of life to look back on and go, that was almost the person I was going to marry. But I changed all that, and she made the choice to get away from that. What do we know about how life has been for her and how she's processed this?
So Bonnie, obviously when we arrested him, we dug into his history, found Bonnie. So we interviewed Bonnie multiple times to get really an image of DeAngelo, the Golden State Killer. I've talked to Bonnie a couple times as well. I mean, immediately after court, I ran into Bonnie and Jane. I ran into Bonnie and Jane, and we were talking outside. We took a picture together as well. Before I wrote the book, while I wrote the book, I reached out and talked to Bonnie as well. She is a powerful personality. She has also right now trying to help out some of the survivors. She's part of a group of the survivors group to really help other survivors as well. She's part of a group that started by Chris Pedretti. Chris is one of the other survivors, Chris and Gay. So I cover a few of the stories in the book, and so they started a nonprofit called Phyllis's Garden, which supports other survivors. And so part of the proceeds of this book goes to support Phyllis's Garden so that we can support survivors. So many of the survivors have found their voices and have turned pain into power.
Tan, how has this case coming into your life, how has it changed you as a person? Because you don't walk away from this unscathed either, I imagine.
As prosecutors, we see people at the worst moment in their lives, right? Either they are a victim and they've had the very tapestry of their life shredded, they are or lost a loved one, or they are a defendant and now they're facing life in prison. We see people in the darkest moments. It's never good when you come and see a prosecutor, right? And like first responders and like the police, we take in a lot of the sins of the world. I wrote about in the book. The sin eaters, the sin eaters in England, they're hired to come to funerals and they eat a piece of bread almost to represent that sin, not to absolve somebody of the sin, but to help them move on to the afterlife. And so these cases, they stay with you. It's hard to take in the darkness. I can't turn on the switch on and off my mind. I don't sleep very much. This was the last case I handled, but it still stays with me. But the way it's affected me is this. It has reinforced my belief in regards to the resiliency of the human spirit. That you could have the most horrible things happen to you and you could come out on the other side hurt, pained by it, but then turn that tragedy into triumph like so many of the survivors have. And the other thing it reminds me is justice never sleeps. It never forgets. Sooner or later, we will find you and we will bring you to justice. And even if you are dead, we will bring your name into the light of day. We will drag it into the sunlight to show the world the monster that you were. And those are the two constants that I keep with me, is that the eternity of justice and the resiliency of the human spirit.
Speaking of that, genetic genealogy also doesn't forget. And that's part of what brought that's one of the big things that brought the Golden State Killer to light, was just that. How many other cases do you think are out there? How many are you aware of in your own ecosystem where you're like, if we could start cracking the code on this a little bit, get some investigators reopening some cases using IGG to do essentially what they did here, and in so many other cases of tracking folks down. Do you think that there is going to be a massive resurgence in old cases now that this technology just keeps getting better and better of unearthing crimes that many thought either went to people with the grave, or that they just thought they got away with for 40, 50 years?
So my office pioneered the use of investigative genetic genealogy to solve this case. And right now, and we teach across the country on how to use that technique. We develop best practices. And I can tell you that there's been over 1,000 cold cases that have been solved since the Golden State Killer, from child molestation to rape cases to murders, using IGG. And we continue to do it. So after was elected district attorney, I started a cold case science and technology unit where we're going over cold cases right now to solve them. The other thing that I've started as well is I created a task force to look into the MMIP crisis. So MMIP stands for Murdered, Missing, and Indigenous People. Indigenous women are 10 times more likely to be murdered than their counterpart in the general population. And many of these cases go uninvestigated and unsolved. And there's nothing but silence left for our Native people and those families. So I started a task force working with the sheriff's department and a local tribe to really look into these cases. So we're trying to use this to solve so many different other cases and bring justice. And the technique that Paul Hoves came up with on here, and that we perfected, has solved cases and brought justice to families.
Let me ask you this about IGG, and maybe kind of an idea too. Obviously, somewhat we're at the mercy of if you go and do the test, take the test, volunteer for the test. A lot of times it's, you've got it as a gift, or you decided, I'm curious, I'm going to go sign up for Ancestry or 23andMe or whatever it may be. And then it gets into the database. Has anyone ever thought of offering IGG tests just on an open basis for anyone who may be sitting here going, I suspect my uncle might have been this person or might have done this, but maybe they don't have the means, or they don't, to go spend the $100 on the test and then get that information into the database. And I know you don't technically need to be like that close, but I'm wondering if there was a way to encourage more people to get their information into the database under that sort of a thinking of, I don't care if I'm exposing a horrible human being, and I just don't have the means to get that information out there. Does anything like that exist for folks who are thinking, hey, take my DNA and see what kind of monsters are in my bloodline, basically?
I think that's a really interesting idea in terms of doing it. Obviously we have to get the funds together to help people do it for free. Right now we are investigating a cold case murder. And we have narrowed down the family tree to this one family in the Midwest. And we have been in contact with that family because we need somebody in that family that we think is related to them to upload their DNA. So we sent them a kit. We paid for it. We're trying to help them go through the process of loading that information into the database so we can figure it out. So we will work with individuals that we believe is a relative of the killer, because there are certain common ancestors that from there you can figure out what branch of that family tree the killer resides in.
I love that. I just wonder if there was, obviously funding is a big thing with that. I just wonder if there was more opportunities for people to upload their DNA if they wanted to and they weren't held back by financial means. How many more pieces to the puzzle investigators would get to help solve some of these crimes, if that's an availability, if that's a resource that they could take up. I don't know. I'm very fascinated by it. I always wonder. A joke I always make is, if you really want to, if you're wondering about your own family and you have a get together, whether it be Christmas or whatever, get everybody a DNA kit and see which family member is off in the corner like, I'm good, I don't need one of those. That may tell you all you need to know.
Might be a red flag.
Exactly. Might be a slight red flag there. It's a fascinating book, The People versus the Golden State Killer, Thien Ho. It's available November 11th, correct?
Yes.
Wherever
November
books
11th.
are sold, yes. Go check it out. It's such a fascinating story and a chapter of this story, if you've been following it, that you've not heard before, from a perspective you've not heard before. Thien, thank you so much for coming on and sharing your experiences in all this with us.
No, I really appreciate it. As I've said before, this is the third book in the trilogy. You had Michelle McNamara's book, Paul Holes, who did the investigation, but this covers the investigation, the capture, and the prosecution. And it's been an honor to be on your show. I love the conversation. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Your thoughts in the comments section, everybody. Until next time, for Stacy and Todd, I'm Tony Brueski. We'll talk again real soon.
Want more on this case and others? Then press subscribe now and don't miss a moment of true crime coverage from Tony Brueski and the Hidden Killers podcast.